morning. I hope everybody had a nice Thanksgiving. So mine was kind of unusual, but nevertheless, it was Thanksgiving. This lesson, gee whiz, I'd hope there'd be more than 10 people here. But how many are there? Let's see, there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 people here. So I guess that's enough. So, and I think this lesson may be a little more philosophical than anything else. But I've struggled with how to start this lesson. And I looked up the dictionary definition of a particular word. It's a 2-letter word. And neither one of the dictionaries that I read, I thought, did a very good job of conveying what I think this word is. And but it's a big word, and it's found throughout Scripture. In fact, it's so frequent that I couldn't find a Bible I couldn't find any place where there were some of the older translations that could tell you how many times it appeared. In the American Standard, it appears 1,588 times, and in the ESV, which is a modern translation, is 1,673 times. But in the New American Standard, it didn't even have it. And I couldn't, gee whiz, unless I had recollection, I couldn't find this word anywhere. But we use it all the time. It probably comes out of our mouth on a daily basis. Okay? And I'll just put it to you like this. This is the title of the lesson. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Does that make sense to you? Nothing changes if nothing changes. Well, how does that apply in our life? How stubborn are we? Do you ever want to make a change, but then you find yourself, I ain't going to do that? Happens to me. I'm going to do this. Next thing I know, I'm not doing this. Nothing changes if nothing changes. What's that saying to you about your own self? Nothing changes if nothing changes. Now, you're not supposed to be considering yourself nothing. What we're talking about is how we behave, right? Nothing changes if nothing changes. What did Christ come and do? Here this guy was, we don't know exactly what he looked like, but he wasn't exactly a rich man wandering around. We know he looked a little better than John the Baptist, don't we? John the Baptist was described as somewhat of a wild man. But Christ came. And what was he after? What was he after with people? Was he trying to make them become more aware? Was he trying to... What was he doing? What was he doing? If you were listening to Christ on the Sermon on the Mount, what would you think? He's teaching, isn't he? Teaching for what? For what reason? Just to educate? We all go to school for education, don't we? What do you do with your education? When you got out of high school or you got out of grade school, did you just throw it to the side and say, I'm just going to do whatever? What is the benefit of an education? Well, lawyers can say a lot, especially crooked lawyers. They learn how to use the system to their benefit. Well, what about using the system that God teaches? How much of a benefit do you find in that? How many of you have just cast aside what you learned, let's say, when you were young learning about the Bible? Or if you didn't learn it when you were young, whenever you got a little older, someone spoke to you about it and you started to learn. How much of it has been put into application, actually works in your life? Some people want to teach you, well, works won't get you to heaven. Well, I suggest to you that the Bible teaches you otherwise. It teaches you have to have faith, and faith produces what? Works. Works without faith or just works. So the two go hand in hand. It's kind of synonymous with each other. So we go back to, if nothing changes, nothing changes. You can't what? You can't work your way into heaven. But faith without work, what good is it? I'm going to go put myself in a closet. Part of the work of a Christian, and one of the main works of a Christian, one is your behavior, but the main work is talk to people about this. But one of the things is, if we notice the way Christ presented things, we notice that everything he said made a lot of sense, didn't it? It wasn't just a bunch of useless gibberish. It was very specific if you really boil it down to its essence. So, this word, this two-letter word I'm talking about, nothing changes if nothing changes. Christ used that word a fair bit. If. So what is if? What is it? Anybody want to tell me what if is? There's a if is. Two-letter words back to back. If is. Is if? What is it? I contemplated. I'm just kind of going, golly, I kind of know what it is. But what is it? Anyone in here is an English teacher? You know what it is? You ever hear of the word conjunction? It's a connector, isn't it? So I thought it best, rather than me trying to explain this, the best explanation I found was in the Cambridge Dictionary. Merriam-Webster wasn't so concise, I didn't think. First thing it says is if is a conjunction, and that is considered with a situation. If is a conjunction in that situation. It says, used to say that a particular thing can or will happen only after something else happens or becomes true. And they give a few examples. I'll pay you double if you get the work finished by Friday. What does if do for you in that particular statement? Kind of opens it up to where this is what you got to have, but if you don't make it, you don't get it. You don't get paid on that day. Another example, if not, we'll have the party in the garden if the weather's good. If not, it'll have to be inside. It gave us two choices, didn't it? Outside or inside. Next example, if anyone calls, just say I'll be back in the office at 4 o'clock. Well, what's the if implying there? What if no one calls? That's what he's saying. If anyone calls, okay, just say I'll be back in the office at 4 o'clock. So the opposite of that is if no one calls, I don't have to say anything. All right? See the implications with this little two-letter word? Another one. If she hadn't called, I wouldn't have known. And I'll use an extreme example. How many of you in here have ever received a death message? How many in here have missed a death message? I have two particular friends. And I didn't know until years later about what had happened. I would say, hey, whatever happened to so-and-so? Oh man, really? If she hadn't called, I wouldn't have known. Now, even if I wouldn't work for them, even if they paid me twice my current salary, I'll read it another way. I wouldn't work for them even if they paid me twice my current salary. Even if. We get what if is saying to us, but can we really define it? It's a conjunction. It like joins two ideas together, or it'll spread two ideas apart. If and when, we'll deal with that problem if and when it arises. We'll deal with it when it arises, if it arises. So what are you telling you there? Be prepared, right? Even if it doesn't arise, you're still prepared. Read it again. We'll deal with that problem if and when it arises. What about your Christian faith, your faith that you try to apply? You know something's going to come after your mortal body dies for you. What does that say? Let's read that again with that thought in mind. What happens after we die? We know that there's a fateful meeting with our Creator. And something called judgment occurs. We'll deal with that problem if and when it arises. What does that sound like? Most of your friends? A lot of your friends? A few of your friends? How about yourself? If it arises. Are you totally convinced that you will face judgment? Or are you not convinced that you will face judgment? We'll deal with that problem if and when it arises. How many times have we done that? Finally, if disturbed, the bird may abandon the nest, leaving the chicks to die. If. Well, I've seen, my wife is quite the bird nut, and I've seen quite a few ifs around our place concerning birds. Right now, she's got a dove that she raised. It was just maybe a 2 or 3 day old chick. And that dove grew up, and it still had its young bird feathers, and it flew away. And she didn't see it for the better part of 7 or 8 months, and it flew back. It landed right on a chair where she sits in the back porch, and she's going, what in the world is this? And then she figured it out. This is the dove that I raised. But if it hadn't shown up, what would the assumption be? Bird's never coming back. But now it set a precedent. So now my wife, the bird just recently flew away a couple of weeks ago, hadn't shown back up. Now what does she say now? It'll probably be back sometime in the spring when the doves migrate down there, and then they migrate back. Especially when you got free food and you don't have to go hunt for it. We got a lot of birds in our backyard like that. So if nothing changes, if nothing changes. So when you heard Christ first preaching, or heard the words, what happened? What happened in your mind? What was going on in your mind when you heard that? Nothing? Did the word if kind of start to creep in? When did you decide that you weren't going to behave the way you were behaving? Or that you needed, for lack of a better term, maybe an insurance policy for yourself? Maybe what you might call a death policy. You get a payment at the end of your life. Nothing changes if nothing changes. If you would, turn to Matthew 6. Well, let's go back. Matthew 4. Let's look at some application here. Matthew 4, and if you want to, we'll just drop down to verse 6. Well, let's just go back. Let's just back up and start in 5. This is the temptation of Jesus. It says, then the devil took him into the holy city and had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple. And he said to him, if you are, what was that first word that he said? If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you. And on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Now, what if Jesus had elected not to say anything? If he had elected not to say anything, we'd just have a blank space. There wouldn't be much of a connection there. So, if he didn't say anything to him, what would we have if we picked up in verse 8? Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain. Well, wait a minute, what happened there? He accused him, but Jesus didn't say anything. But Jesus did say something to him because of the first 2 words there. If you are. Oh, big word. Jump over to chapter 5. Let's look at verses 29 and 30. We'll just pick up in verse 27. It says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Most of us men in here know exactly what he is saying. And I would flip it on the flip side for women also. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. But in the following verse, let me find it again here. Gee whiz. It says in verse 29, if your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out, throw it from you, for it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for the whole body to be thrown into hell. And he goes on, verse 30, if your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it from you, for it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now those are extreme examples, don't you think? Chopping body parts off. What is he really saying here? And I'm not going to say that he may not absolutely mean it, but at the same time, what is he actually saying? If your right eye offends you. Well, if your right eye offends you, why don't you just close your eye and turn your head away? Don't look. But this all hinges around what you think. What you think. You know, James gets into this business about think. You've heard me say this over and over and over again, and I'll continue to say it. What you think determines everything that you do. You're the only one in charge of what you think. Okay? So, let's look at Matthew 7. Let's look over here and see what if is involved there. We'll just pick up in verse 7. It says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Seek and find what? What's every one of us in here seeking? Why is your warm body here? Why am I standing up here? I'm seeking something, aren't I? I would like to go to heaven. I would like for judgment to go softly on me. Start again. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. Well, let's just insert F. If you don't knock, it won't open for you, right? If you knock. If you knock. If you don't knock, you won't. Knock and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Or what man is there among you who, when his son asks for a loaf, will give him a stone? Verse 10. Or if he asks for a fish, he will not give him a snake, will he? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give what is good to those who ask him? So this word if, it's inserted in the right place. If you then, it doesn't say if your neighbor or the president or someone else. It says if you are solely responsible for what you do, what you think and how you react and the things that you do. Matthew 10. Let's turn over to Matthew 10. Let's just pick up in verse 5 to read this. It says, these 12 Jesus sent out after instructing them. These are his disciples. Do not go in the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter any city of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, and cast out demons. Freely you received, freely give. Do not acquire gold or silver or copper for your money belts, or a bag for your journey, or even 2 coats or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worthy of his support. And whatever city or village you enter, inquire who is worthy in it, and at his house until you leave that city. As you enter the house, it says, if the house is worthy, give it your blessing. Well, now, when he says if is joining up. It's a conjunction to something else. What is that something else that he's saying here? If the house is worthy. Well, okay. Well, who determines who the house is worthy or not? The owner? The landlord? Who is this person he's telling? Who are these persons he's telling? You make the determination if the house is worthy. If the house is worthy. Well, let's turn this to ourselves. This house I live in, this thought process, these memories I carry, are they worthy? Some are, some are not. You follow what I'm saying here? He's given a responsibility on this determining about the house to the disciples. And this is a physical thing, but I think a little bit further into this. He's giving them the ability to make the determination of worth. And he gives that assignment with the word if. If you. So self-judgment comes back to if me determines I'm not worthy or I am worthy. You see where this goes here? It comes back to right up here in your mind, your actions and what you do with them. Turn over to John. This is the Apostle John in the Gospel. In John 7, and I've marked it at verse 37. Let me reread this right quick, see if we need to preface this with a little bit. Well, let's just pick up in verse 37. Now on the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, and he said he cried out. That doesn't mean he shouted or screamed, but he cried out, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from the innermost being will flow rivers of living water. But this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. For the Spirit was not yet given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. Glorification came a fair bit later here. But again, if we look at this, if anyone, what does that if declare to us there? And the second word kind of conjunctions with it. If anyone. Does that say if one? Well, maybe it could be. But what is anyone? How many? Does anybody in here want to say something about this? Anybody? When I say the word anybody, does that define one or how many? Anybody can define a whole bunch. Anybody can say anything. If anybody. And when you say if anybody, what else does that connotate in your mind? How about someone that's in jail? If anybody. Or like the world likes to think of us as goody two-shoes. Anybody. That's from however you define a person, all the way through whatever definition you want to apply to it. If anybody. You kind of pose that question to yourself. What is anybody? So, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. That's the 14th chapter and the 15th verse of John. If you love me. What is if defining there? It's a conjunction. What is it conjunct together? Well, you is one. But the defining part of this is love me. Love me. Now, how do we love Jesus? Do we do it by stabbing him in the back? Saying, I never knew who this guy was. I'm not part of that party. You'll keep my commandments. Well, what commandments? The ones that come from the government? The one that your mama and daddy taught you? What commandments? Well, it's very fine. It's very, very, very definite. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Well, how many of them do you think he gave, or how many suggestions did he give on the Sermon on the Mount? Do you love me or not? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do those things have to be defined for you? You will keep my commandments. One of the simplest ones I can think of, two of them come right off the top of my head. One is, you shall not steal. No matter how you label it, you shall not steal. Some people can come up with any kind of excuse for stealing. We have laws in this country that are crazy laws. Well, we got to follow the laws. But what about another one? Lying. Lying. Yeah, when we think about keep the commandments, don't murder. Well, wait a minute. How many of us in here have done that? I'm not saying anybody has. I just pose this as kind of a crazy question. If is a big word. If you love me. I would suggest that most of us in here say we do love Jesus. But how many of us cross that line and break those commandments? If can get harsh on you if you'll just allow your mind to think about this. The harshness should sharpen your edge against sin. Not relish it, but sharpen it. If you would, turn over to 1 John. All the way towards the back. And John is, they're all short. But 1 John in the 2nd chapter, and just look at verse 15, 2 and 15. We'll just read all the way through down to about 17. He says, do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lust, but the one who does the will of God lives forever. Verse 15 up there, he says, if anyone. There it is again, if anyone. But down here in verse 17, it's a kind of a curious verse. The world is passing away, and also its lust, and the one who does the will of God lives forever. The world is passing away. The world strikes me that the world is like it was in the time of Jesus and the times before Jesus. In fact, probably when Adam walked around. What is he actually saying here? He's telling you your life is going to come to an end. It is passing away. And all this junk I described before, all the accumulation of stuff that you got in your lifetime, it's not going to be yours anymore. My son-in-law came a couple of years ago and he saw all the stuff I've got out in my garage. And for the few of you that have actually seen the stuff I've got in my garage, you can only imagine how much more junk I've got in that garage for cutting metal and doing all the oddball things that I do. And not long back, when we were in Tucson, I was showing my son-in-law a few pictures of some of the stuff I've got. And even some of the recent acquisitions I had a piece of equipment break, and I bought a whole bunch of stuff to fix the new one better than the old one. And I said to my son-in-law, Cliff, you're going to get it all, buddy. You're going to have a great time with all this stuff. He just kind of groaned. What kind of thought is that when you think, gee whiz, no one really appreciates what they're going to get from me? I'm not a rich man. I won't ever be a rich man. I don't even play the lottery to try and be a rich man. But you think about that. What are you passing on? What will you leave behind? One of the things I think of is my grandmother Kelley. That was my mother's maiden name, and that was her. Her first name was Opal. And that woman, from my very earliest memories, was always reading the Bible. She got older, she had this gigantic Bible that covered up her whole legs. Huge print, because she couldn't read unless she had these giant print. But that is the main reason. When I first heard Scripture actually being said, and she sat me down to make me read this stuff, it started putting life into perspective for me. Even at the early age of 12 and 13 years old. Things like this, if anyone, if my grandmother hadn't set me down, I was probably headed to a bad place. Because I was getting pretty rambunctious about that time. So if anyone, do not love the world or the things in the world. It's one thing to have this stuff, but to fall in love with it, that's a whole nother ballgame. It's a whole nother ballgame. And that's where you got to be very, very careful with yourself. How big a house do you want? I have a friend that lives in Montana. He moved up there to get away from everything. Lives 50 miles from Canada. Built a relatively nice house. I forget how big it is, but it's nice. I've seen a few pictures of it. And he said, yeah, when I first moved here to this little town, the houses were being built by millionaires. He said, now they're being built by billionaires. And he says, some of these guys are building guest houses that are 75,000 square feet for a guest house. Good grief. You could open a factory in some place like that for a guest house. I always think, couldn't you use a little bit of that money to help some of the suffering, that sort of a thing? Use it for good rather than just, okay, that's an investment for real estate, and when I sell it when I'm 85, I'll have more money. Those sort of things. But it's up to the person. It's up to each individual one of us to do what we want to do with what we've had been given. And that includes being able to speak this to friends and other people. Because that's part of, I don't want to make it sound bad, but that's part of the baggage of being a Christian. You are dealt with that. So I'll finish this with this little thing here. And I spied this out of a lesson from somebody else. It's just purely by chance. I just saw it and I thought, I'll start reading this. And it dealt with the word if. And I haven't used any of this guy's stuff until this little story right here. And I wrote it in real little bitty letters, so I may have to kind of squint a little bit whenever I read this. And I freely tell you this is not my idea, but it's such a good story. But it relates things very, very well. He says an example. He says, when thinking about sin and the fact our sin will surely be revealed, I think of the man who applied for a driver's license. One question on the application form asked, have you ever been arrested? The applicant answered, nope. The next question was only to be answered if the previous question resulted in a yes answer. The next statement read, state why. The applicant should have left it blank, but he wrote in, never been caught. These are my words here. Concerning sin, we're always caught. You might think you can get away with it in the closet of your mind, but it's there. It's stuck there. And I'll leave you with this. 4, 5, 6 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, this documentary came out about the CIA, and I was all interested in it because I had a friend of mine whose father worked for the CIA, and he was one of the guys that administered the drugs for this thing called MK Ultra. They were wanting to see if they could find drugs that could alter people's minds and get people to become robots for them. Well, the guy that was doing some of this research was literally cutting the top of someone's skull off and laying it to the side. They had anesthetized the person, but they were using electrical wires to probe the brain and find out what part of the brain did what. And American doctors found out about what this guy's doing, and they shut him down, but he moved to Canada, and he proceeded to keep going with this. And after about, I think, 14 or 15 years, or maybe 10 years, they had entirely mapped the entire brain. And in one quick little statement, and I'd watched this documentary like 3 times. The third time I was doing some work and I was just listening, he said something that absolutely stopped me cold. And I have the little statement right here on my phone. I recorded it, on the screen. He just said, quite by accident, we discovered that every thought, everything that the human brain ever sees or thinks is recorded in the human brain. And this goes all the way back to being a baby. Now, if you think that your thoughts are just going to disappear on you, think again. They're there permanently. It's a permanent record. So if you think in judgment that you're not going to get caught, think again. Now, this is stated as a fact in this video. So, with that thought, just think about what we think and be careful with what we think. And use the commandments, the things we've been taught, to lead our lives with, rather than letting the TV or your friend or whatever. Whatever's your weakness, kick it away. And that applies to me too. If there's anything I've said that's wrong or in between or in error, please let me know. Thank you.